How can Africa speed up its development? By speeding up its energy transformation. Despite Africa's great potential for clean energy, only a tiny fraction of the world's renewables is installed here. The African continent is growing faster than ever, and it simply can no longer afford more investments in the dirty and fragile economy of the past. Today, we're at a turning point. The recovery plans are the once-in-history push to radically change direction. We are here to make it happen. At RES4Africa, we stand for Africa. We believe in its huge potential. We believe in its innate energy. We believe in its growth. And we believe that all it needs is an enabling environment for its full development. At RES4Africa, we care for Africa. That's why we believe that clean energy is the only way to go. Because renewables mean more affordability. Because renewables mean more jobs. Because renewables mean more value. Because renewables mean more resilience, social justice, and health. At RES4Africa, we join for Africa. A unique blend of expertise along the whole value chain of renewables, joining forces to accelerate the transition towards a sustainable and inclusive future. At RES4Africa, we innovate for Africa. We constantly look for new, improved energy solutions to provide not just clean and powerful electricity, but also cutting-edge and reliable plants, electrical grids that guarantee quality and stability through digitalization and storage. At RES4Africa, we act for Africa. We promote dialogue between governments and private players to define conscious, long-term policies, encouraging adequate investments. We share know-how with all stakeholders to promote the full development of Africa together. We train locals on the field to share our expertise and make them owners of their energy. And we never, ever stop looking for new and win-win business models made of African DNA. With a long-term green recovery strategy, we can finally build back better in Africa, ensuring universal access to energy, making its economy more resilient, and leading the whole continent straight into a sustainable era. We are RES4Africa. Our mission is to build a better future through better energy. In Africa, with Africa, for Africa.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and I hope you like our new video, institutional video that we just finished now to update our broad mission to not only to Morocco but to Africa. Today, I have the pleasure to introduce you to this webinar, which is under the partnership with the Minister, Meme, and we are very proud again. We are touching the several issues that the ministry is asking us to deal. And today is a very interesting and very innovative approach to the cross-border between Morocco and Africa. Let me show you just a few slides for those who are not familiar with us. We started in 2012 as RES4Med, you see on the corner on the right, and then we're becoming now RES4Africa Foundation. Next slide, yes. You see the next slides, how many we are. We are becoming bigger and bigger organization in terms of European manufacturer, European investors, banks, and this happens only because we have also a strong partnership with the African colleague. Next slides. You see the local. Can you have the next slide, please? We have a lot of, well, this is the RES4Med. RES4Med logo, I'm very affectionate because I started in Morocco in spring 2012 with this logo, and we keep the logo to call all the cluster of activity doing in Northern Africa. But of course, the foundation is much bigger than that. And we want to promote renewable energy in Southern Mediterranean country as a cost-effective, sustainable, reliable energy. Now, don't forget, and we started when desert tech was the mainstream mantra. The only way to do renewable in Africa, in Northern Africa, was to import to Europe. Now it's a different approach. Now Morocco will decide if they want to export for joint benefit to Europe. Next slide shows, in fact, as I said before, we have done so much, and thanks Ilaria for keeping the momentum. Those are all the main activities and the main reports. You see in the left part, you see also the new red and gray report of today. So I'm very proud that everything we do is on our website, and you can download not only for free, but without any registration or password. We believe that the more people know what we do, the more people download our products, the more the benefits for everybody. I used to be a researcher and used to have a patent, password. Innovation, you don't protect, you just disseminate innovation. And that's why, please, I invite you to go and download the report easily. Next slide shows also how we work together with our partner. In Morocco, for instance, we have this logo on the left. We are very proud to have a long-standing track record of relation with those partners. And together with Mr. Zubir and the Morocco Ministry, we have now on the right the topics that Ilaria is developing one by one in order to, in this year, maybe also next year, to go ahead and present and share with you our thoughts, your thoughts on those issues. Today, next slide, we are going to discuss this very interesting and very exciting topic, the study on cross-border PPA in Morocco. You see on the left the cover, and as Ilaria said, we'll say at the end of the meeting, you can download this report from our website. We want to show you the benefit of this interconnection, which should be now a mutual benefit, strengthening the security of both sides, supporting the role between a neighboring system, providing more stability in the grid, better use of resources, increasing competition, and facilitation of commercial energy exchange. Why Morocco? Well, Morocco is a continent leader in this issue. Morocco is setting the way to go ahead for renewable. Therefore, I think Morocco will be the best country to adopt this scheme. So looking forward for this presentation. I want to thank all the speakers, starting from Mr. Zubir, and then Amin from Mazin, and then of course Yasmina from our membership who wrote the report. I think that's it, and the last one should be just an information. Next slide is how we expand the network. By the way, Ilaria created this MED platform. We have 408 active profiles. If you want to join easily this platform, you can be informed specifically on what's happening in the Mediterranean. I think it's a success story, and therefore you can also comment, receive information dedicated to the people in Northern Africa. And it's very easy to go ahead. Please go and join this platform. I think I'm over. Just next slide, I think, is the address. Yes, these are our reference, info.res4africa.org, www.res4africa. Please be in touch with us. And I pass the floor to the organization. I think, Ilaria, is your time. Let's just me say that today is Veronica's birthday, so she can blush a little bit, but we don't see her. Today, Veronica, one of the speakers, is her birthday, is a baby girl, and we wish it all the best from Medareg for us. Ilaria, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Roberto. We can leave the floor to our moderator, Silvia Pariente. Thank you, Silvia, for participating in this webinar.
Okay, thank you very much, Ilaria. Thank you very much, Roberto, for inviting me. And I have the duty of chairing efficiently this webinar for the next 2.5 hours, I guess. So I will be very strict with the speakers, as we have 5 very interesting presentations that will be followed by a Q&A session, and each participant can ask the question in the panel here, and we will be monitoring with Ilaria your question so that we can put them to the speakers at the end. So without any further delay, I will introduce the first speaker and then introduce each one as we go along. The first presentation is by Mr. Zubir Idrissi, who is the Director of Electricity at the Ministry of Energy, Mines and Environment in Morocco. And previous to that position, he was working at the National Electricity Company in Morocco, ONE, and is a member of several committees linked to electricity, gas, renewable energy, and has 34 years of experience in the energy sector in Morocco. Mr. Idrissi, the floor is yours now.
Thank you very much. With pleasure to share with you this morning some words about cross-border PPAs Morocco and what we can do to overcome barriers. I think with the RES4Africa and the RES4Med, we work hard to launch many items on how to develop and promote renewables and how to give access to energy for maximum of bodies from Africa countries and also from Morocco, that's else from PERC. So next slide, please. Let me give you an overview of the Moroccan electricity sector. And the second point, we can discuss about electric interconnection between Morocco and Union European, mainly Spain and Portugal, the existing and the projects. And at the third point, we can have some words on barriers and how to overcome them. So the first point is the Moroccan energy strategy was based on 4 main objectives: security of supply and availability of energy, and widespread access to energy at competitive prices, and the energy efficiency, how to change behavior to consume energy in the good manner. And the fourth one is the preservation of environment. 5 guidelines strategic was set up. The first one is to diversify and optimize our mix, electricity mix, around network reliable and competitive technology choice on cost, capex, but also on our capacity in Morocco, as you said, Mr. Roberto, the potential of wind, of hydro, and of solar. And the second one is how to mobilize national resources by the rise of renewables. And we can have a look about the rise we done since 2009 until 2020. The fourth one is how to strengthen regional integration of electricity markets. And we can have a look about our interconnection with Spain and the project in study in progress with Portugal. And also we do that because we promote and develop other technological and other markets as gas and such hydrogen. That's a good thing to be in the sustainable development. Next slide, please. So the main objective is to the one before, please. Please, the slide before, I have to give the presentation about organization of sector, electricity sector. So on the slide before, our sector of electricity is organized on a bicefal manner. So we have a regulatory market and liberalized markets. On generation, we have interconnections, we have PPAs, and we have some unit of generation owned by ONE, and one PPAs with MAST. On the other hand, about liberalized markets in the generation, the law 13.09 permits to private sector to develop units from hydro or wind or solar. And we have also the self-generation. And the transmission, the ONE historical actor is the owner and the takeover all generation that can transmit by the network of very high and high voltage to the big consumers as mines, as industries, and to distributors. Distributors, the market is on a system with operator of ONE as ONE, and with distributors as we know with the term of in French this régie, and the concession with private sector, third concessions at Tangier and Tétouan, Rabat and Salé and Casablanca. With this slide, we can learn about the development of our mix of electricity since 2009 till 2019. And we can have a look about how much we have on renewables and how much we have on other sources. And the target is now to exceed 52% by 2013. This promotion and this development of renewables is based on a strategy launched since 2009, and of course it was driven by laws, many laws, the law to permit to private sector to develop and to commercialize the kilowatt hour to consumers, and the guideline is with equity to let the injection of this generation to be sold to consumers and to be transmitted and distributed by the network. And we have a body of regulation of markets, and also we now discuss how to organize independent transmission entity. Next slide, please. So our planification of the future we negotiate the Green Deal with Union European, and we have to accelerate our transition. So 100% is our planification till 2024 from renewables, with 49% from wind power and 42% from solar and 9% from hydro. Until 2013, we are now doing studies to learn how to integrate hydro energy station pumped the step, and if any battery energy storage systems. The next one, please. Our interconnection, as you can see here, from Spain we have 2 interconnections since 1997, and the second one was launched in 2060 with maximum capacity about 1,400 megawatt, 4 megawatt, and 900 megawatt as maximum commercial capacity. And the ONE is the operator, is have status as external actor in the Spanish market. And with Portuguese, we develop the feasibility study about interconnection straight to Portuguese. It very costs, but with our colleagues from Portuguese, we look forward to launch this interconnection as soon as possible, if any financement could be disposed. And with Spain, our last meeting with Spain colleagues, I hope that can take place the signature about this 3rd interconnection by the end of the year. Please, next slide. To give you some look about the evolution of imports and export with Spain in gigawatt hour, as that said by Mr. Bigoto and all experts now, before it's a little export to Spain from Morocco, but we import a lot. By the end of 2018, Morocco exports than he imports. And this situation, at this moment, we have to reinforce all development of laws, framework of laws, framework of finance mechanism, framework for the policy deals with Spain and with Portugal, with Germany and with France on the set roadmap. I know that Mr. Hababi can give more details about this item. And we work with many organizations as RES4Africa about how to give Morocco a great chance to develop a certificate, a green certificate mechanism in Morocco. At the first phase with the physical market, and the second phase we can launch the financial market about that. And the many teams with different items, I think 4 items can work by the end of this month. I think the side of Morocco, we can ask about some barriers to overcome, but it's a long road that Morocco has expected and done. And now we can, with the Union European, work hard to overcome the barriers that are coming from signatory, parallelism of laws, and how to have a recognition, mutual recognition between us on the mechanism we can do in Morocco and have a compatibility of these systems. Next slide, please. So as said, that Mr. Hbabi will give you overview and some details about the set roadmap. That's a good thing, which launched during the COP22 in Marrakesh, and the declaration, the Paris Agreement, which aims for carbon-free energy mixes by 2050. As I asked at the beginning, we negotiate with the Union European many topics on they help Morocco to accelerate this transition in the way that make sense to have mutual mechanisms and recognitions between each other. Next slide, please. As I said, we have to accelerate our return to establish the mechanism of green certificates and to introduce this concept in Morocco market, and the choice of bodies who have to register the certificates, who have to establish and verify, and who have to control, and who have to manage the finance markets. At this issue, I can wait for your questions, and it's with pleasure to have to discuss with you with an overview for you, everybody. I wish that a good day for all of us, and have a good health. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Idrissi. As I said before, we'll take all the questions at the end because there are a lot of links between the different presentations, and it's more interesting to have an open. So I hope you can stay with us until the question and answer session, which will be at the end. And I will go, we will move immediately to the next speaker because we're already running a little bit short of time. And the next speaker will be Jasmina Otsik, who is a manager at PwC. She was in charge of the study that Mr. Vigotti mentioned in the introduction that was done on corporate PPA in Morocco, what is working, what is not working, and how can make better. And I would like to add, but I'm sure we'll see that in the discussion, that corporate PPAs are not new in Morocco because several have been signed in the past, and it's actually already a dynamic market. So Jasmina, the floor is yours now for 20 minutes maximum.
I'll try. Thank you, Sylvia. Just can you confirm if you're seeing my screen?
I see it, so I assume everybody sees it.
Okay,
please go
ahead.
Excellent. They will scream if they don't see it.
Thank you all. Good morning, everyone. Happy Ramadan to those who are fasting. My name is Jasmina Hodzic. I am a manager at PwC. I'm here to present the study, which is kind of the source reason why we are all here. The study was done by PwC, including both the advisory branch and the tax and legal team, in collaboration with the RES4Africa research team. So while I'm here to present, it's been a work of many persons, many hands. So in my presentation, I will tell you what are the barriers that we identified in the study, and then I will show you a business model that we theorized as potentially feasible for cross-border PPAs with some policy recommendations on how to implement this business model. So moving right into it. Let's see if I can. All right. that is the slide. So I will start with asking, why should Morocco and EU countries even pursue cross-border PPAs? And I start with motivation. So I have it for both Morocco and the EU. Obviously, for Morocco, motivation is to develop its local renewables potential. We saw earlier that Morocco has this immense potential that is currently untapped. Developing it would mean obviously export revenues, local industry development, local jobs. So it's kind of a no-brainer for Morocco. On the side of the EU, why the EU should import energy from Morocco, this is related to the green targets of the EU. So we've seen recently the European Green Deal, which increased the CO2 emissions target by 2030 to 55%. Now, we don't have yet a firm target for how much renewables will be needed by 2030, but in this chart, what you see here is the target for renewables that was theorized in the Green Deal Impact Assessment Study. So while there is no firm target yet, clearly the gap between 2018 and 2030 is very steep. So the EU and its member states will need to increase the supply of renewable energy, and obviously there is an imperative to supply it from places where generation costs are lowest, and Morocco is one of those places. Now, moving on to what are the enabling factors to actually pursue these cross-border PPAs, there's many. Here I choose two under Morocco. One of them is that there is a firm political commitment to promote corporate cross-border PPAs. And the embodiment of that is the SET roadmap. This is a diplomatic initiative between Morocco and 5 EU countries, which I believe will be described later on by Maz and colleagues. So I will not go into detail on the SET roadmap, but basically the political commitment to make this a reality is there. And that is probably the #1 most important enabling factor. Another important one is that there is an interconnector that could be used, and there is also spare capacity on that interconnector. So that is obviously also a precondition more than an enabling factor. Now on the side of the EU, the enabling factor is that there is a series of cooperation mechanisms that would allow EU countries to import renewable energy and then make that energy count towards their renewables targets. So when I say targets, I mean the official targets towards the Green Deal. Here I list some of them. We have joint projects, we have the Union Renewable Financing Mechanism, we have the CEF cross-border project. So all of these are obviously driving why we should do these cross-border PPAs. So with that in mind, what are the barriers? Well, I don't want this presentation to be too negative. I mean, the point is not to delve too much into the barriers, but maybe just to tell you how we structured our thinking in this study. So we started, when we assess barriers, we started by saying, well, what are the requirements to make cross-border PPAs a reality? And one of them is, we group them into 3 categories. One of them is regulatory, then we have infrastructure, and then we have market. Regulatory conditions, here obviously for cross-border PPAs, just like for PPAs in general, what is needed is a transparent, clear and well-functioning renewables market that has firm opening conditions for private participation. What is also very important is that there needs to be a guarantees of origin system that is mutually recognized. We need to have a transparent fee regime so that players on both sides, so the generator and the off-taker, have clarity about what fees will be included in their PPA agreement. And then also an independent regulator is needed. Now on the infrastructure, here it's a bit more straightforward. There is two separations. What is needed is both a cross-border infrastructure, meaning an interconnector that has spare capacity, and also what is needed is a stable and flexible national grid that is able to integrate a growing share of renewables. Then on the market category, now on the right-hand side of the slide, here probably the most important element is there needs to be a comparative price advantage of producing Moroccan energy and exporting it to Spain. So, you know, in the absence of this economic condition, no other condition can make up for it. So simply for the Spanish off-taker, it has to make economic sense why should he import the power from Morocco rather than from Spain? So these are the preconditions. Now moving on to, now I have 3 slides to show you how much these preconditions are met in Morocco. So also here, the study goes into detail, and I will not go into every single precondition into too much depth, but maybe just I will pick the few most important ones, and then you can have the slides as well as the study later on. So on the regulatory side, Morocco is obviously one of the most liberalized countries in North Africa. It has had IPP participation in the market for already quite some years. So the overall situation is there. The ability of IPPs to access the market is there, but more work is needed. Particular areas of attention is that there needs to be more transparency on grids. On fees. Also on grids. No, on fees, what is needed is greater transparency on, what is the level, what are the mechanisms, because currently a lot of them are negotiated bilaterally, and they are also subject to annual indexation. So oftentimes neither the producer nor the off-taker have full clarity about what fees they will be subject to. Another thing on the regulatory side is the guarantees of origin. Currently, there is no mutually recognized system between Morocco and EU countries. So this is clearly, if we want to pursue green corporate PPAs, this is a must, obviously, because for a Spanish off-taker or a Portuguese off-taker, the ability to prove that their energy is green is fundamental. I will move on to infrastructure barriers. So here, it's quite a different situation between national grids and interconnectors. So on the Morocco-Spain interconnector, there is 2 of them currently. We've looked into, is there sufficient spare capacity? The answer is yes, there is. So if there was an interest to have cross-border PPAs, there would be capacity to absorb those additional flows. But the problem is that there is no long-term capacity allocation mechanism. And that is kind of a regulatory aspect. It's not pure infrastructures, but it's an issue that needs resolving. The Spanish TSO Red Electrica has already started to look into that to create a capacity allocation mechanism for their side. But it needs to be accelerated, because that capacity allocation mechanism would allow greater planning for all sides to actually execute the PPA. And then on the national grid topic, in Morocco sites, but particularly, this is potentially problematic in the sense that the Moroccan grid needs to receive investments if it is to integrate a growing share of renewables. So the grid is particularly needs developing in the south, where there is a very high RES potential, where currently the connections are not that high quality. So this is an area that needs quite careful investment plans. And now on the market barriers, and this is here. This is quite a. It is the last in the order, but it's probably the most important one. And I want to focus on the bottom box that says existence of arbitrage opportunities or a relative price advantage. So I said before, this is the absolute most important precondition for cross-border PPAs to happen. So what we found, we've run in our study, we've run a calculation of LCOE costs, cost of electricity. We've also looked into prices of auctions in Morocco and in Spain. The data or the evidence shows that, yes, generating electricity in Morocco could be more competitive than in Spain. And this is largely thanks to a larger natural resources potential. So simply the irradiation in Morocco could be stronger than in Spain. However, and this is quite important, however, grid fees are quite an unknown. So grid fees, if they are too high, they risk eroding that comparative price advantage. So we did not make firm claims about this because we do not have full visibility on grid fees, and obviously it also depends where the plant is and it's project specific. However, it's quite a delicate balance. So in order for cross-border PPAs to become a reality, the price advantage must be firm, because otherwise there is little economic interest for anyone to engage. And with that, I want to dedicate the last few minutes to presenting our business model. So here I'm going to walk you through quite a few elements. So bear with me. So what I have here in this slide is a very basic schematic overview of the market. So on the left-hand side, you have the generator in Morocco. Then there is the Moroccan TSO here on A. Then we have the Spanish TSO, RES4Africa. Then we have the Spanish retailer, and then the red box on the right is the potential off-taker. In this case, we put a CNI, so a customer that is price sensitive. So if this customer wants a cheaper electricity from Morocco. Okay, so what happens? The Moroccan generator sends energy to the Spanish off-taker, and it also sends renewable energy certificates. So I should have said this model could be in the current status, right? And then I will also present you a model with some modifications, but this is the current existing possibility. So, okay, they exchange energy and renewable energy certificates. Then what happens? The off-taker pays to the generator the price of the PPA. It also pays to the Spanish retailer a sleeving fee, so-called. This sleeving fee would contain the costs of Spanish balancing, transmission, and interconnection. And then the off-taker also pays to ONE the costs of Moroccan transmission and interconnection. On the other hand, the generator pays to ONE the costs of the balancing fee, and then potential grid reinforcement fee and grid upgrade fee. And lastly, the generator also pays to the government the annual fee for export. Okay, this is in the law, so there is an annual fee. Good. Now, what are the issues with this current model? There's a couple. Well, firstly, we looked into these fees that the Moroccan generator has to pay on the one hand to ONE and on the other hand to the government. So we don't have full visibility on how high these fees are, but we found that these fees risk eroding that relative price advantage of exporting Moroccan energy to Spain. So overall, the rule is that fees need to be commensurate to the service provided. Then another difficulty is that for the Spanish off-takers, and now going back to the right-hand side of the slide, paying the Moroccan transmission and interconnection fee to ONE may be cumbersome administratively. So the Spanish off-taker may not fully know how to make the transaction, and it's an international transaction, so it may be complicated. And also the Spanish off-taker may be averse to being exposed to a currency risk. So obviously the fee to ONE would be in Moroccan dirham, so there may be a risk aversion there. And then another problem is that with the renewable energy certificates, which currently are not mutually recognized, or rather there is not a clear system for renewable energy certificates in Morocco. Good. Okay, now with this, I want to repeat the same business model with some minor modifications that we propose. So now we move on to the part of our policy recommendations. Again, as Roberto said at the beginning, these are entirely independent. It's only a proposal and they're all up for discussion. So feel free to bring your questions later on. So let us have, here again, we have the same scheme. This is now what we propose. The flow is the same. So the generator sends renewable energy and certificates to the Spanish off-taker. The Spanish off-taker pays to the generator a PPA price, and it pays a set of fees, we call it a sleeving fee, to the Spanish retailer. And this would be a unique fee that would include all the costs for both the Spanish side as well as the Moroccan side of fees. Now, what does the retailer do? The retailer pays to the Spanish TSO, RES4Africa. It pays all the relevant fees, including the ones for Morocco. And then RES4Africa has an agreement with ONE to transfer directly to ONE the Moroccan fees, right? So they can agree whether they are in euro or in dirham. So what effectively has happened here is that RES4Africa somehow, in an agreement with ONE, has isolated the off-taker from that currency risk. And also it simplified the transaction for the off-taker, because as you see now, the off-taker only makes one transaction. And then the generator only pays the balancing fee to ONE, and what you see is that there is no annual export fee. So in summary, what have we proposed compared to what is the current situation? We've proposed to scrap the potential grid reinforcement and upgrade fee. The idea is that the balancing fee and all the other fees already include the costs of grid reinforcement and upgrade. Then we also propose to scrap the annual export fee. Now the reason for this is that in reality, the annual export fee has never been really implemented in the sense that it's legislated, but it's never been practiced because there is no private export of electricity as of now. And then another thing that is proposed with this model is to introduce a cooperation framework between Red Electrica and ONE, which would permit the transfer of these interconnection fees between the two entities in a way to simplify the exchange for the off-taker. And finally, certainly not least important, is to introduce a guarantees of origin system and to ensure mutual recognition. So those are the recommendations. Now, I do have one last slide with other recommendations that are not related specifically to the business model, but are kind of specific to, are generic to improving the market. So we have on the regulatory side to improve the transparency and predictability of fees, to introduce a capacity allocation mechanism for the interconnector, and to strengthen the regulator, which started to operate recently. On the infrastructure, there needs to be an increase in investments in Morocco's domestic grid. There also needs to be an acceleration of works on the third Morocco-Spain interconnector, which the MOU has been signed. And certainly having extra capacity would be a boost to cross-border PPAs. And lastly, in the market segment, we recommend to create a standard contract for cross-border PPAs. In that way, it would reduce transaction costs, improve bankability. And then lastly, it would be it could be conducive if there would be a pilot project for cross-border PPAs to test the business model and to find if there are any other barriers. And with that, I'm done. I hope I'm not over time, Sylvia. Forgive me if I am. Thank you to all, and also special thanks to RES4Africa team. This has been a teamwork.
I have built myself a terrible reputation as a tough moderator here. We will immediately switch to the next speaker, move on. Unfortunately, Mr. Zerwali, who was on the program, couldn't be with us today. And we have to thank Amin maybe for replacing him on the spot at the last minute. He is working with Ali Zerwali in the Cooperation and International Development Division, in particular on the set roadmap, and he will be today going further detail to present the set roadmap and in particular the institutional framework for green electricity exchanges and focusing on corporate PPAs. I mean, the floor is yours for about 15-20 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sylvia. Thank you, Mrs. Yasmina, for the presentation, and Mr. Zubair for your presentation too. So I'm presenting myself. I'm Amin Hababi, a specialist in international cooperation and business development within MAZEN, the Moroccan Agency for Sustainable Energy. First of all, I want to thank RES4Africa for inviting me to this webinar to speak about renewable energy. It is always a pleasure for me to participate in this foundation's events, and always find myself captivated by its content. Next slide, please. So before moving to the set roadmap that I'm gonna present, I just want to make a brief introduction about MAZEN, the Moroccan Agency for Sustainable Energy. It was created in 2010. MAZEN is a Moroccan company with public funds in charge of steering renewable energy development in Morocco. It is therefore the main player in the field of renewable energy in Morocco. So MAZEN has three main missions. The first mission is the development of renewable energy installation in Morocco, from planning to implementation and operation, as well as the development of a local industrial ecosystem. Our second objective is the contribution to the emergence of a national expertise in the field of renewable energy. And the third mission is the local development around the plants. So the business model of Mazen seeks to promote sustainable development and a local social and economic welfare where the plants are implanted. Furthermore, Mazen missions are intended to be carried out on a continental and international scale. Now part of the regional and international scene of the renewable energy sectors, Mazen's ambition is to share all the experience it has acquired since its creation for the integrated development of renewable energies with countries that have these resources and needs to develop them. These ambitious objectives clearly show the strategic significance that the country gives to the development of renewable energy on its territory, aligning its national interests with those of the international community. So thanks to its renewable resources and the means currently deployed, Morocco aspires to become the African leader in renewable energy and the major exporter of electricity from renewable resources. Next slide, please. So, as Mr. Zubair said before, and Mrs. Yasmina Hodzic said, I'm gonna give some more detailed explanation about the Sustainable Electricity Trade Roadmap, as known as the SET Roadmap. So, as I said before, Mazen is the main player for renewable energy at the national in the continental level. And it has been involved in the implementation of the SET roadmap, the renewable electricity exchange project between Morocco and several European countries, Portugal, Spain, France, and Germany. So this initiative consists in the implementation of an economic, regulatory, legislative, and institutional framework to promote the exchange of green electricity between Morocco and Germany, Spain, France, and Portugal, with the objective of taking advantage of the electrical infrastructure of these 5 countries. Next step, please. Next slide. So Mazen plays the role of the secretary of the steering committee and ensures the organization and monitoring of the project with the signatory countries. So, as Mr. Zubair said before, the SET Roadmap initiative was launched in 2016 during the COP22 in Marrakesh, when a joint agreement was signed between the 5 countries to promote a renewable electricity trade between them. At this initial meeting, it was first decided to launch preparatory studies for a roadmap on sustainable electricity trade to demonstrate the benefits of increased trade. Electricity trading projects linking the 2 shores of the Mediterranean Sea are not new. There have been some initiatives before, like Desertec, Medgrid, etc. They are not new, as Europe has long been interested in southern opportunities to import decarbonized energy at competitive costs. Regarding the SET roadmap, 2 years of preliminary studies have confirmed the benefits of electricity market integration between the 5 countries. Following these studies, a new joint declaration was then signed by the 5 countries in December 2018 in Brussels, confirming their willingness of the 5 countries to remove the physical and regulatory barriers to the integration of their electricity markets. Next slide, please. The steering committee, which is assured by Mazen, was charged with designing a first memorandum of understanding to seal the agreement of the 5 countries in order to put in place the rules and procedures necessary for the contracting of green electricity through the cross-border renewable corporate power purchase agreement, as known as the CB green corporate PPAs, cross-border green corporate PPAs. So in this memorandum, in this agreement, the signatories have agreed to work jointly to implement actions for short and long-term integration. So first of all, the short-term actions will focus on establishing the prerequisites for cross-border renewable electricity corporate PPAs, which are to propose the amendment of the law 1309 that Mr. Zubair spoke before, and the required legislation to facilitate cross-border exchanges and allow the access and utilization of the ONI transmission grid system by third party, so that producers from the 4 European countries can also sell into Morocco. When I talk about ONI, I talk about the Moroccan TSO. So this amendment implies the removal of the barriers put in place, particularly in terms of medium and high voltage allocation and reciprocity in relation to the opening of the producer and consumer markets. This also implies the need to ensure for the main players the access to the Moroccan-Spain interconnectors. The memorandum of understanding also includes to work on the development of a certification system for renewable energy that is recognized by the European Union. As such, many studies are currently being conducted to enable Moroccan energy players to prove the renewable origin of the electricity they intend to export. A system of certificates of origin recognized and adopted by the 5 countries will allow those exchanges in the future. The 5 countries also agreed to continue working in the development of physical interconnections and the remove unjustified barriers to cross-border corporate renewable energy PPAs between all signatories. These interconnections concern in particular the existing lines between Morocco and Spain, but also the reinforcement of these interconnections thanks to the implementations of other lines, again between Morocco and Spain, but also between Morocco and Portugal. In order to allow a more fluid access to the rest of Europe, the interconnections between the Iberian Peninsula and France will also have to be strengthened. Concerning long-term actions, Morocco will have to work towards its standardization to the European legislation and regulation in order to achieve the acquis communautaire. To this end, the European partners should also assist Morocco in this task. Other long-term actions are still to be identified by the steering committee. This memorandum of understanding, now accepted by the set roadmap stakeholders, is expected to be signed in the coming weeks. These cross-border renewable electricity purchase agreements will enable large private energy consumers interested in clean energy to buy electricity from a producer located in one of the set roadmap countries. Next slide, please. So there are many advantages to this exchange. The first, I will just give you some examples. The first advantage is the access for large energy consumers to low-cost sources decarbonized electricity, resulting in increased competitiveness. Another advantage is supplying clean energy will help companies to enhance their image and meet a set of environmental and ethical standards. It will also contribute to reduce the carbon footprint for European countries, which wishes to drastically reduce their greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 to 55% for the European Union and to achieve the climate neutrality by 2050. The import of green electricity to European countries will allow them to meet their renewable energy targets by having access to the renewable potential of certain countries, including Morocco. The electricity networks of Morocco and Spain, as I said before, are already interconnected, synchronized, and share a similar set of technical standards, thus facilitating exchange with Europe. In addition, further direct interconnections with Spain and Portugal are planned in the medium terms. For the moment, only the private sector will have the opportunity to purchase renewable electricity from an independent power producers under the set roadmap, as the corporate PPA only concerns private institutions. Nevertheless, it is expected that the integration of signatory country energy markets will be deepened in the future, and further opportunities for electricity exchange between Morocco and European countries will be explored and, if possible, implemented. In this way, other players could benefit from sustainable energy trade. It is noted that European companies which have participated in this effort of convergence between the said countries have shown a strong interest in the development of this market and are committed to promoting future investments in this direction. Lastly, and in conclusion, in addition to the economic and greenhouse gas emission reduction benefits of this Trans-Mediterranean initiative, the set roadmap could become a successful model of North-South cooperation, encouraging viable and sustainable energy partnerships between the two sides of the Mediterranean. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Amin, for sticking to the time, for a very rich presentation at the heart of the subject. And I'm sure there will be many questions coming, including from me, by the way. But before we do that, we're going to move now to two speakers that are going to give us a little bit of the broader picture of the Mediterranean, because two key topics that keep popping up everywhere: right regulation. So the question, but I know when you're a regulator, you always need regulation. But from the point of view of the players and the industry, the question is, what is the right amount of regulation? What is flexible regulation? What is dynamic regulation, so that we don't go back to a system which is so rigid like before monopoly? And also, do we have the right infrastructure? So first we have Veronica Lenzi from MEDREG, the Association of Mediterranean Energy Regulators, where she is head of policy and communication. And that's a topic she knows very well. Veronica has a PhD in political system and institutional change. And besides MEDREG, she has worked at the Observatoire Méditerranéen de l'Énergie. So Veronica, the floor is yours now.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to Roberto and to the RES4Africa team for putting together such an interesting panel. So my presentation will try to connect a bit what we have heard so far, and maybe even pave the way for Angelo's presentation later on, because the scope of what I'm going to talk to you about is to present you some reflections that MEDREG did in the context of its electricity and renewable working groups. So what you will see here today is not really my opinion, but is what MEDREG and its working groups have developed throughout the last few months. Next slide, please. So for as a starter, let's say, to put down some elements for your consideration, I would like to set the ground for what we are going to discuss in terms of regulation. So the idea is really that regulation, especially in the Mediterranean region, should accompany electricity and gas markets towards certain market designs and governance regimes. So it really has to start with national peculiarities, national needs, and then, and that is the part that is a little bit trickier for the Mediterranean at least, to try to integrate national systems with one another in a regional way. So Morocco, we know it's a little bit the wonder child of the region, because it's a, yes, a developing country with a very high level of electrification, even compared to neighboring countries, a country that has invested heavily on renewable energy sources in a very clever way, also investment-wise, and that has recently, after a few years of hiatus, introduced ANRE, the new regulator. So what I want to do with my presentation today is to try to relate these dominant issues of governance and the approaches that can be taken, and relate them to the Moroccan situation when it comes to its market design and what comes next. Next slide, please. So as I said before, and sorry to insist on this a bit, but I think it's relevant for our discussion today, If we look at the Mediterranean, there are some characteristics that have to be taken into account. So we know, for example, that geography is not always, let's say, cross-border friendly for investment integration, because we have population that is heavily concentrated near the seashores, and we have, in many cases, large territories, so the distance between consumption areas can be great. But also, we have to consider that the generation levels per capita and the, let's say, capillarity of transmission networks is below European Union standards and what is considered in general to be optimal. So the idea for investment is really to be key, not only, let's say, to address, let's say, the challenges of the future that are, of course, the intermittent integration of renewables in the grid, but also to strengthen existing systems and covering the growing needs of the population. And this, of course, has also an impact on security of supply, because geographical isolation also means that ensuring security and continuity of supply might be more difficult than in other situations. Next slide, please. So on security of supply, I think we have to spend a couple of more words because it is a common issue, but it can present itself under different scenarios. So there is an important increase of demand, of course, which can hinder security of supply by itself. We have, as we said, isolated systems somewhere in the Mediterranean, and that require a different approach, an approach that sometimes also goes off-grid and consider alternative solutions to connect people, although not to the main grid, but maybe to mini-grids and local network systems. And of course, the problem is sometimes the unavailability of interconnections where they are needed. Now, we know there are a lot of projects underway. I'm sure Angelo will tackle this better in his presentation. The problem is always also to move from theory to practice. So from, let's say, the decision to invest on a new transmission interconnection project and the capability then to do so in a decent amount of time. So the idea is that really investment planning when it comes to infrastructure is a challenge. And one thing that is, of course, helping out on this would be, let's say, to use complementarities between electricity systems to try to make sure that what is done in one country can also have a regional positive ripple effect. Then we know, of course, that power losses are also an issue for the region, and that quality of supply is something that many regulators in the area are trying to tackle, and that can be in a way exacerbated by intermittent power generation, such the one provided by renewable. Next slide, please. So when it comes to regulators, really, what we at MedReg, let's say, summarize as four main challenges that have to be tackled by our bodies of regulators are the technical, economic and commercial, financing, and let's say legal, broader regulatory one. So the first thing is the reliability of electricity systems. So the problem of managing congestions and the integration of interconnections in the load curve management. This is something that, of course, has a lot to do also with TSOs. It's not an exquisite regulatory issue, but this is really where there is to be an idea, a control of what TSOs do by the regulator, but also cooperation between these two bodies, because otherwise what happens sometimes is that the regulator is not really in control of what goes on in the systems. Then we have the economic and commercial aspect. So the idea of being able to have consistent electricity flows, the capability to use the capacity available, and also the capability to have transactions. So the development also of a fluid market that requires a lot of IT work, by the way, but also, of course, the existence of bodies that are able to manage this aspect of interconnections. Then we have financing, that is, of course, also something that has to do with the governmental choices. So the capability to set up institutional loans, secure international financiers for the most important projects, and also the capability for the government to be let's say, trustworthy partner of investors when new projects are proposed for the region. And then finally, when I was speaking about the legal part of regulation, compatibility of rules, which very easily means that regulators have to speak with one another, and of course also governments have to speak with one another to make sure that we use the same language and that the rules that we apply are interoperable among each other. Next slide. So for us in particular, we believe, and this is something that directly applies to Morocco, although we will come back to focus on the country in a couple of slides, we believe that the first task of a regulator is to build workable markets, so interoperable markets. New suppliers have to be able to come in. There has to be an economic efficiency, which means that cost-wise investments have to make sense, and security of supply, of course, has to be guaranteed. In order to do so, it is a task of the regulator as well, and this is something that was mentioned in a couple of presentations before me, to facilitate investment and develop market integration. This is something regulators cannot do alone, and I want to stress this once more. It is something that has to be done in cooperation with ministries and governments, because oftentimes regulators are just consulted or are just a part of the puzzle when it comes to decisions on investments. So, as in all the Mediterranean countries, the idea is really to deal with uncertainty also for Morocco concerning market developments and economic growth and energy consumption. So the idea is really for the regulators, as we know, to be the referees of the market, but also to have a clever combination of short-term and long-term vision, so to understand what the countries need now, but also try to understand where the energy plans that are devised at political level can bring the country in the future. Next slide, please. So coming back to the electricity sector in particular, the quality of the vertical coordination within the electricity chain is one of the most crucial aspects to be considered. And this is something that has, of course, to do with unbundling and competition. So we know how it works in the northern shore of the Mediterranean. We have market mechanisms that allow for coordination. And we know that in the south, basically all the countries that are part of the MEDREG network are moving towards liberalization. But the problem is that the way this is done, the way this impacts the system has to be very carefully assessed. Otherwise, the risk is having a liberalized system on the paper that in practice continue to work exactly as a vertically integrated one. Next slide. So if we look at the interdependence of electricity markets, and that is why also the unbundling module is so important, we see that we can look at the classical generation, so baseload, peak, and balance responsibility. And then we have the decentralized generation. So we know that there is the intermittency issue for wind and photovoltaic. And then there is also the issue of controllability of this type of generation. And then to add to the complexity, we need to consider also the financial side of the energy markets. So the balancing market itself, the CO2 market, and the way spot and futures market also work. So this is a big responsibility, a big burden on the shoulders of TSOs and DSOs. And this is a system that by definition, by itself, is sometimes unpredictable and that requires a lot of adjustments. So this is why at least the unbundling system that is arranged and implemented in the country has to be clearly defined and possibly stable. Next slide. So now focusing on Morocco specifically, so I think that we can summarize, and this is something that the colleague from the ministry already explained in the first presentation. We can see that the main challenges are the growth of demand, so they needed to maintain a sustained pace of supply development to keep up with the demand growth, and also the fact that Morocco is engaged in several interconnections existing and upcoming with Europe, which means also that what happens in Europe has an impact on the choices Morocco is making. So the idea is also for the emergence of significant independent production to fill a bit the generation gap and make the market more dynamic, more able to also, in a way, self-regulate the generation needed based on the commercial developments. So the first aspect, I want to, let's say, go into detail right now, but because it has already been discussed, is the need to develop infrastructure as quick and as much as possible, preserving the supply-demand balance. So regulation has to be, let's say, a tool to do that. And this is something where UNRE needs to be able to start making some decisions, and also find the right system management to effectively support ongoing developments toward greater openness. So how do we do that? What is the model that we want to apply? Next slide. So it's certainly true if we look at renewable that they are one of the best way to reduce energy dependence, and that in Morocco this has been done with a careful development of the competitive sector. So we have Mazen that is, let's say, the centralized manager of RES development, and we know that independent producers are allowed. And that is something that reveals that there is a very healthy and vigorous debate in the country, where the regulator, let's say, is also getting a say recently. So about the role of the private sector and the fact that from what we understand, the principle of a careful unbundling seems to be getting, let's say, a decisive preference in this discussion, but yet many technical parameters have yet to be decided. Next slide. So the thing is that we look at an hybrid model between open and regulated market, and we need to clarify also the role of ONI in this unbundling system that we are discussing, and also trying to understand what will be exactly the role of the regulator in controlling the different segments of the market. Next slide. So looking at orientations, from our point of view of MEDREG and from the discussion that we are, let's say, having also with our member regulators, UNRE, but also other regulators that are having bilateral relations, such as, for example, the French regulator with UNRE to support them in the development of their expertise, we see that ONE, that is currently the incumbent, should keep managing the system development and should work as a TSO, at least for the time being, in terms of planning, and of course play a role of supplier of last resort. Mazen, we already said, remains a very expert and very important actor for the development of the ambitious projects for photovoltaic and in general renewable sources. And then we have IPPs that allow private independent producers to also be present in the market, or according to Law 1309, on the free market. So the idea for what can be taken in terms of regulation from this situation is that there should be a cohabitation, cohabitation should be maintained between a regulated sector through the single buyer and an open sector for renewables only. However, as we said before, the regulation of the TSO and the provision for the integration of private production are aspects where we feel that some developments and some more clearer orientation should be given. Next. So the idea is, and then I will move, let's say, to the best practices and examples from European side part, but the idea is really to tackle unbundling and balancing activities in particular. So for unbundling, we already said there are several options. Legal unbundling is at scholar level considered to be the target model, but it has to be decided based on the proper level of centralization and management of interconnections. So once more, it is not a size-fit-all approach. It should really be dependable on the type of development that we are going to see based on the, let's say, governance of the sector, and the clarification on the status for the single buyer. For the balancing activity, The idea is that there are yet not balancing responsibility for suppliers, and that the system operator remains the central body for ancillary services, demand balance, and managing the supply. But these are aspects that have to be clarified more than it is currently the case. Next slide. So why did I want to mention the European case? Because as I said before, well, for two reasons mainly. You know that in MedReg we try to take the best practices of European regulators and put them at the use of Southern Shore regulators. So we work a lot on this transfer of capabilities. And the second reason is because, of course, Morocco is interconnected with Europe. So, as I said before, there is a ripple effect, a connection between what European does and the way the Moroccan electricity system, at least for cross-border interconnection, is expected to develop. So the three key words are integration, liquidity, and transparency. And transparency is something that was also mentioned before, and it is indeed one of the main aspects that investors expect when there is a regulator in place, to have a transparent market. So exploitation of the complementarities of member states. In Europe, this is easy. We have common legislation, but still this is something that the Mediterranean region itself has to address quickly. If we want to really put legs to the ambitious plans that many countries, not only Morocco, have. Encourage stakeholders to invest in infrastructure that is already future-proof in a way, and secure supplies while offering consumers the most advantageous prices, because of course in the end consumers are also to be considered in this equation. So the first prerequisite is the adequate development of cross-border infrastructure, that is what we just discussed, and the elimination of technical or regulatory obstacles to the free movement of energy. That is indeed what is the case when we look at the Morocco-EU interconnection. Next slide, please. So what we expect, let's say, to happen, and what we expect UNRE to do, because by the way, UNRE, also in comparison to other fellow regulators of the Southern Shore, has been tasked with several concrete powers that are expected to give it a very important role in the market, is to be able to have reliable market signals, develop efficiency and solidarity. So the idea is really to have what happens in Europe, so that through interconnections, markets with low prices export to markets with higher prices, and create liquid markets. So have reliable prices that can allow derivatives and hedging mechanisms. Nobody is having an excessive market power, and there is a balanced responsibility principle. So all market players are active contributors to the balancing of the system. Next slide. And then I'm going to conclude with these last three slides. That is what, as I said, we expect also to be able to develop together with UNRE in the near future, is to develop a sustainable network regulation and have TPA to transmission and distribution networks, and consequently access rules and tariffs that are reliable and fully understandable also to investors, a monitoring and possibly also a sanctioning power of wholesale and retail markets, the calculation of regulated tariffs for electricity, but also in the future for gas, and the selection and the participation in the selection of candidates for RES bidding procedures. Next. Specifically on network regulation, the idea is to get to determine tariffs for TSOs and DSOs in the country, as well as other services that are provided by operators. And of course, this is something, when we look at network tariff, that has to be done in very close cooperation with the policy orientations coming from the ministry and the government. And of course, the idea of the regulatory period. We know in Europe it is set up for 4 years. We know that there are a lot of public consultations. This is something that we feel would get to the transparency of the market that we are all aiming for. And the fact that the regulator can approve investment programs, can assess these investment plans, and is also competent to validate interconnection projects. Last but not least, next slide, please, concerning market regulation. So as I said before, a monitoring of the wholesale gas and electricity markets, but here, of course, we focus on electricity. So also monitoring of the transactions and checking of the coherence of actors' bids with the fundamental economical and technical constraints and aspects. The possibility to release opinions and propose measures aiming at promoting a good functioning and transparency of the retail market. And this is, if we really look at the future, if the Mediterranean will be able to develop something close to REMIT, which is probably a very let's say, far-looking forward picture, but this would be something that would really also benefit the commercial linkages with the European Union, but also throughout the southern shore. This is it from my side. Thank you so much. I'm happy to take your question afterwards.
Thank you very much, Veronica, for being so efficient and covering so much material in a short time. Quite impressive. Yes, we will take the question at the end, and I'm sure what you presented will raise a number of questions. The next presentation will be on the infrastructure side, as Veronica said, and how we connect the different markets and the role of the transmission system operator to support that process. And our speaker is Angelo Ferrante, who is Secretary General of METSO, the Association of Mediterranean TSO, and he's also with Terna as head of European Affairs, and he spent all his careers in electricity, especially on the transmission infrastructure, so he's well qualified to tell us about those issues. Angelo, the floor is yours now for 15-20 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. I hope you can see and hear me. Good morning, everyone. And first of all, thanks to RES4Africa for this kind invitation. Gives me the opportunity to make some reflections on the role of infrastructure in promoting the energy transition, let's say in the Mediterranean region, particularly in the western part of this region. In my presentation, I would like to extend a bit the view and make some considerations on the need of a Mediterranean regional integration to foster an effective and reliable exchange of electricity between Europe and North Africa, considering, of course, the prominent role of Morocco, which is currently the only country in the region that's connected directly to the European power system, but without forgetting the other projects in the pipeline for connecting the two continents. I would like to mention Italy, Tunisia, of course, which is probably the most mature, with an outlook, therefore, on the possibility to have in the next years, an effective Euro-Mediterranean power system. We can move for the next slide, please. Yes, for those of you who are not familiar with METSO, METSO is the Association of the Mediterranean Transmission System Operators for Electricity, set up in 2012 for promoting multilateral cooperation in the region. The 21 members of our association serve more than 1,600 terawatt hours of electricity to about 500 million people and dispatching about 550,000 megawatts of installed capacity along more than 400,000 kilometers of transmission lines. We are in the peculiar situation of being a mix of European and non-European companies that have therefore the possibility to share different points of view and perspective, although with the common general technical background. So trying to work as a bridge between Europe and the MENA region and promoting the launch of pilot projects that have the aim to strengthen the integration of the Mediterranean power system. We have the support of the European Commission in these initiatives, and we are rather proud to have a full bottom-up approach in our activities. That means that all the information, all the data and the activities are promoted by our members. Of course, ONE is one of the most valuable partners of the association, and has also responsibility positions in the management of METSO. The next slide, please. Yes, just as a recap, some considerations that show that integration is no longer an option, but is a real necessity for the Mediterranean context. All the countries in the region are involved in the energy transition that's characterized by growth of demand, huge investments in gas and renewables, although these investments are sometimes limited or blocked by the market fragmentation and by the heavy asymmetries in legislation and regulation, especially for what concerns renewables. The TSOs, the companies who manage the systems, are called to adapt to this new context and need to operate in a system that requires more and more flexibility. There are important technical complementarities in the Mediterranean region, seasonal, but also structural, because of the differences in the generation mix. This current situation is that today the interconnection level is really inadequate, and it constitutes a barrier for the integration of the power systems. This determines also an unstable environment for investors, because, as I said, the market fragmentation, but also because of the lack of long-term price signals. So reinforced cooperation is essential for us. And next slide, please. This map that I like to show is more useful than many words, because it shows how the electricity infrastructure on the southern shore, in eastern and southern shore of the Mediterranean, is very poor if compared to what you can see on the other side of the Mediterranean in the EU countries. Next slide, please. So TSOs are in charge for ensuring a secure operation of the grid, and this is especially true when they have to enable also the integration of renewable energy sources. Some figures that come from the analysis carried out by METSO, we do expect an increase in electricity demand in 2030 compared to 2018, that varies from 25 to 33% more. We have developed different scenarios, and so this is the range of variability of this increase. And also in terms of evolution of generation, we expect a huge increase of the production, with particular evidence of renewables. You see wind from 94 to 120 gigawatt of new installed capacity, solar and photovoltaic in general from 150 to 190 almost gigawatts, and also for the hydro potential we see some increase, also reduced. So what do we need to ensure this secure operation of the grid? First, a stronger network integration through the development of a new interconnection. And this is the hardware, but it is not enough, because one of the main requisites that is necessary for having a reliable and efficient interconnection is that you have an adequate software for its operation. A software means common rules for integration, for operation of the grid, the capability of managing flexibility resources that are more and more necessary when needing to integrate renewables. In simple terms, we need to guarantee the power system interoperability in both operation and maintenance of the system. We need also commercial schemes that are supported, that have to be supported by the regulators for guaranteeing international exchanges. And in general, other instruments that can boost investments, so adequate remuneration schemes, that means a sound regulatory system for the companies in charge to develop interconnection, a favorable climate for investors for guaranteeing that the necessary investments in new generation are allowed, and coherence of legislation and regulation in involved countries. Because if you have a mismatch of legislation and regulation, this determines a climate of uncertainty for investors that blocks investments. Next slide, please. So our activities are mostly developed along three teams that were carried out in two projects that we have undertaken in the last years. Coordinated planning, that means the necessary actions for developing the hardware. So a common procedures and the creation of the Mediterranean master plan, as we call it. That's a set of interconnections studied and assessed according to international standards, let's say. The software, so defining common rules for achieving power system interoperability and setting up the bricks of what should be a Mediterranean grid code in the future. Capacity building, because we need training and knowledge sharing for harmonizing also the level of knowledge in the countries. And in the new project that we are promoting in these 2 years, started in October 2020, that should last by the end of 2022, we are promoting the realization of pilot projects aimed at developing interconnected electricity exchange zones with a stronger coordination in the development plans, enhancing coordination in operation, and coordinating the development of adequacy plans. Next slide, please. I will go very fast. I mentioned the master plan, which is one of our main outcomes. That's based on 4 main chapters, identifying the main trends, drivers, and uncertainties in the countries, developed based on these key elements, exploratory scenarios that consider different hypotheses of evolution of the energy sector, collect a list of projects and assess them through market and network studies for showing their potential benefits and the technical feasibility, and carrying out a cost-benefit analysis on these mentioned projects. Next slide, please. This is a picture of what we have done in 2020 with our master plan, 15 projects for more than 800 kilometers of additional lines, potentially more than 18 gigawatt of new interconnection capacity, with around 12 billion euros of investment costs. Next slide, please. 2 of these projects, studied projects, deal with Morocco. One, they have been both mentioned in the previous presentations. One is the Morocco-Portugal interconnection between the substations of Tavira in Portugal and Beni Arshan in Morocco for potential new capacity of 1,000 megawatts. Promoted by ONE and REN, the 2 TSOs of Portugal and Morocco. Next slide, please. And the project yields a very positive impact in all the scenarios that we have considered for all the indicators that are part of our cost-benefit analysis. There is a consistent increase in the social economic welfare and in the reduction of RES curtailment in all the scenarios, as well as a consistent decrease in the CO2 emissions. Next slide, please. The second project is the Morocco-Spain, the third interconnector between Morocco and Spain, between the substations of Bir Shan and Puerto de la Cruz in Morocco. It is a alternate current interconnection project that could increase the interconnection capacity between Spain and Morocco for additional 700 megawatts. Next slide, please. Also for this project, the cost-benefit analysis shows a very positive impact on all the indicators and for all the scenarios carried out. It is important to highlight that when I mention the positive impact, I do not refer only to the two involved countries, but the assessment of indicators is carried out in a general regional perspective. Next slide, please. Now, I named this slide interconnecting or integrating power systems. It's not to be provocative, but because, let's say, for professional deformation, when I talk about interconnections, I have immediately the feeling that we need to consider it as a mean for integrating power systems. This is because simply developing interconnection without the technical interoperability of the systems that these interconnections links could determine a very inefficient management of this interconnection. This is why among the many barriers that exist for integration, technical, financial, regulatory, and also institutional, I think that the technical interoperability is the first requirement to be considered. And we should consider that behind, I appreciated very much the business model was presented by Yasmina in that presentation. We should not forget that behind any reliable commercial flow, an efficient and integrated power system exists, because behind commercial flows, there are physical flows that in general are different from the commercial ones. Just to give an example, I mean, the sale and purchase of electricity imply a number of actions. Some of them are commercial, like the contract between the producers and the off-takers. Some are a mix of commercial and technical aspects, like the rules for connecting the users to the grid and paying also levies and fees where it is necessary. But there are some agreements that are purely technical, and without these agreements, you cannot have an efficient interconnection. And these agreements regard the involved TSOs that have to guarantee the proper dispatching of the flows, that have to guarantee the management of the transits, and especially when there are third countries involved, because the simplest case you can consider is a cross-border contract between two connected countries, but in a more complex process, as the set roadmap introduces in some way, with the possibility to export from Morocco to Germany, in principle, you need the management of transit and also the capability of settling the transactions to make a settlement at the end of the process, with the creation of some third-party entity that's in charge for doing this. Without forgetting the need of balancing services mechanisms that are more and more important when the transactions you are dealing with are from renewable sources that are to a certain extent non-programmable, and so that require for the secure operation of the grid a balancing mechanism. As a last point, I would like to mention that the importance of cross-border PPAs is not only as a business opportunity, but as a real opportunity for driving the energy transition and the sustainable development in the whole Mediterranean region. And this is why I think that we should consider the integration of the Euro-Mediterranean power system as a whole, never forgetting this final objective. Although it is necessary to apply a gradual approach because there are no one-size-fits-all solutions, and that's why it is necessary to use a sub-regional approach. The next slide, please. These considerations to introduce some new activities that we are promoting in the frame of the just started TCMET project. Some deal with a broader perimeter of planning, because we want to consider in this new project also long-term planning and decarbonization strategy for 2050. That means extending the Green Deal, the European Green Deal concept to the Mediterranean region, starting considering sector coupling perspectives and possible implementation of power to X or whatever. Morocco is working a lot on green hydrogen. This is something that has to be considered. The possible definition of Mediterranean PCIs, this in collaboration with MedReg. Next slide, please. But I would like to spend again, this is also important. Another aspect of the new project is to define a real Mediterranean network code. In the first project, we have already developed some bricks, some chapters that could be helpful also for the issues that we are dealing today, because there is a technical code for connection, and also models of rules for contracts for connecting the user to the grid. But in the next years, we would like to develop further chapters for being more comprehensive for connection, operation, and market issues, including also the allocation of capacity and congestion management on interconnections. Next slide, please. I would like to, as a last point of my presentation, I would like to mention that in our project, we are promoting the launch of pilot projects. For the time being, we have identified two zones. One is the Maghreb region and the other is the Mashrek Middle East area, where we would like to start implementing a coherent and harmonized set of technical rules for managing the existing interconnections and promote the effective operation of the power system. The next slide, please. In particular, the most mature area in the Mediterranean is the Maghreb region, that is composed of countries that are already interconnected, in some way synchronously interconnected also through Morocco with continental Europe. We aim to support Comelec, the Comité Maghrébin de l'Électricité, for improving the regulatory framework and using a more efficient way the existing interconnections, starting a program of commercial exchanges among these countries. This is the first step of a more general region, interconnected electricity exchange zone, that taking profit of other projects like the Italy-Tunisia interconnector between Tunisia and Sicily could create a kind of ring, including some countries, Southwestern European countries, and the Maghreb region. Next slide, please. But I think it was the last slide of my presentation. Yes, so this project could be includes a set of new and very challenging actions for the Maghrebian TSOs, and we hope we are able to promote it. Of course, it is not in the responsibilities of MET-TSO. It is in the hands of the companies, but we are ready to play our role for making it possible. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Angelo, and all the speakers for sticking to the time. And means now we have about 20, 25 minutes, maybe 20 minutes for Q&A and discussion. And we will pick up the question we received from the audience. Unfortunately, Mr. Idrissi had to leave. He had an urgent meeting because I see a lot of the questions coming up addressed to him. We may have to store them, and maybe the organizer RES4Med will get back to us with some of the answers. So let me start by picking up some of the questions I see on the panel. The first one would probably go to, given Mr. Gris is not here, to Angelo Ferrante. You presented the Morocco-Portugal interconnection. I don't think you gave a date when you think that could become operational. Can you give us a date?
No, let's say as far as we base in our studies on what is given us from the promoters, from the TSOs. So as far as I know, this project is still under a feasibility state according to the agreement, to the intergovernmental agreement that was signed, if I'm not wrong, a couple of years ago. So let's say we don't, in general, we do not replace investors. So we carry out studies and assess costs and benefits of the projects, but without entering into their practical realization. That's in the hands of the promoters.
You remember what date was given in the, I don't remember, that's why I'm asking you, because I was trying to remember the date. I'm also familiar, having participated in some of the studies. The feasibility study, what date did they have in mind for the commissioning?
I'm not sure about that. I don't want to give a wrong date, but for
No
sure, I could say 2028, but I'm not sure about that. So
okay, we'll find the information. I guess RES4Med will find it. A second question we had from the audience. I think it would have also gone to Mr. Idrissi, who is not here, but let me put it on the floor and see if any of the panelists will risk to answer that. I will not, but the question is, what are the political constraints for exporting from Morocco to the EU? So is anybody willing to try to answer that? Well, I don't think so. So, okay, I think we'll skip the question here because it will have gone for the government of Morocco and they're not present here. Then I have some questions here more related to the set roadmap and probably questions for Hamid Lababi. Two of them, what are the next steps for the set roadmap once the memorandum of understanding is signed? But also, you've mentioned that during all of the development of the MOU and the studies work, there was a lot of interest of company. If you can give some example, and also your presentation, you mentioned that there will be more consultation of the private sector, I think. So if you can give more details. So the floor is for Amin Lababi.
Yes, thank you, Sylvia. In order for this agreement to have a decisive impact, it is important that as soon as it is signed, we all work together to develop interconnections and liberalize the Moroccan renewable electricity market. So we also need to start consulting the private sector to ensure that its needs are taken into account in the framework of this agreement. And in this regard, countries have agreed to participate in high-level conferences on corporate PPAs in Europe and to organize meetings between the Secretariat, assured by Mazen, and private companies identified by each country. So as I told you in my presentation, those companies are willing to work and to develop this initiative because it represents it can represent a competitive way to reduce their cost of electricity supply, but also to, I don't know how to say it, but to have a better image in terms of ethical and environmental aspects. So this exercise is essential to accompany the discussions and deepen the steering committee understanding of the barriers and obstacles to the conclusion of cross-border green corporate PPAs. So this consultation will also be an opportunity to sensitize the private sector to the SET roadmap initiative. And moreover, there have been conferences that have been taken not last year because of the sanitary situation, but 2 years ago. And during this previous conferences organized, some global private sector actors have shown their interest in taking advantage of the opportunities offered by the cross-border PPAs. Talking about the next steps regarding the SET roadmap, we should study more markets to be developed within the SET roadmap, such as the spot, forward, and balancing markets. We have to establish procedures to allow Moroccan generators to, Moroccan private generators to participate in the Iberian and the other markets of the SET roadmap. Allow direct sales in Morocco by European generators, introduce as I said, the spot, forward and balancing markets in Morocco, with the creation of a voluntary power exchange as a first step, and in the long term, implement market coupling, starting with of course, with the Iberian Peninsula, as a first step towards full market integration.
Okay, thank you very much. I think if you're not speaking, I hear some background noise, so participants should keep their microphone off when they're not speaking. Actually, many questions are popping up as a result of what's going on. Let me sort them out and into groups. I think there are a set of questions here which were mostly addressed to Mr. Idrissi, but can be answered by Angelo and maybe Veronica and also Jasmina Ojig. Let me put several of them together. It was mentioned that it was Mr. Idrissi presentation. He referred to hydropower and batteries as a source of flexibility and not so much interconnectors, but we know interconnectors are an important source of flexibility, was the presentation by Mezzo, by Angelo Ferrante. I know the SET roadmap started with the corporate PPA initially because it was thought that there would be less of an issue of risk to the power system because it was to be small volumes. So maybe if somebody could address flexibility needed for corporate PPAs as opposed to the general trading. Second point that was also brought up several times was the need for creating a Woolsen market and a balancing market. Clearly, if you have a corporate PPA, it is difficult to contract between a producer and a buyer, a seller and a buyer, if you cannot guarantee full coverage of the need of the buyer. And the other point that was mentioned several times was to go by the market coupling. If we go in phases, like Mr. Ferrante mentioned it, the market coupling of Morocco with the MIBEL market, and when will that timing could be actually, because it will be the first phase. So those are kind of, in my view, group question, and I will put it maybe first to Jasmina Ojig, and maybe also Veronica and Angelo. Jasmina Ojig, you have the floor.
Yes. Hi, Sylvia. Yeah, there was quite a bit in there. I think I was gonna take I was gonna take the very first one. Can you remind me the wording? It was about the need for the balancing and the wholesale market, right?
That was the second one. The first one was the issue of flexibility that interconnectors can bring in the presence of, and whether this is as serious, you know, for a corporate PPA as opposed to general trading of bigger volumes, you know, addressing the flexibility issue and the threat to the green infrastructure from corporate PPA, specifically given your study was focused on corporate PPAs.
Yeah, okay, I'm gonna give some maybe strategy answer, and then I will leave the technical aspects to colleagues, maybe to Veronica. So yeah, there is definitely a delicate trade-off, and we don't take it lightly in our recommendations where we say that some fees need to be scrapped, because obviously the Moroccan grid needs reinforcement, and financing those reinforcement has to come from somewhere. And so scrapping the fees is, you know, it improves the business case for corporate PPAs, but obviously, you know, it risks depriving the Moroccan grid of funds that are needed. And so it is a question. I mean, our study did not go into answering that question of how to finance the grid expansion of Morocco, but it is something that policymakers need to look into. And so it's not only a matter of mobilizing finance, but it's also about creating credible investment plans. So there needs to be rigorous planning going into that. And also the role of UNRE, the new regulator, will be to work on that investment plan and to create a fee model that can finance that investment plan. So again, several issues here. One is planning, one is implementing, and one is mobilizing finance. Now, we don't think that corporate PPAs can be a source of that finance simply because you erode the business case for doing the PPAs in the first place. So the grid fees imposed on market participators have to be commensurate to the service being provided. But it is a conundrum, so we don't take it lightly at all. And then on the second question that you said, the need for the balancing market and the wholesale market. So this is quite closely related to the mechanics of how you do a PPA agreement. And none of us today went into the details of, you know, maybe the flows of a PPA. I mean, we kind of assume that everybody is familiar with it, but basically having a wholesale and a balancing market greatly eases the pricing, how you price a PPA. So oftentimes the PPA is priced as a reference to a wholesale price. So we're obviously having visibility on what is that market price can greatly facilitate trust between parties, right? Because there is a price risk. So parties want to know that the price that they are paying is realistic and it's reflective of the market condition. And so not having a wholesale market is a barrier, right? Because if I don't know what is the market price, how do I know that my generator is offering me a fair price? Or am I being, you know, somehow cheated out of a good deal? So obviously there are all sorts of mechanisms through which we can gauge the market price level, but, you know, having a wholesale market would greatly facilitate that price setting. And balancing market, quite similar. Here it's mostly about, again, it's related to contractual. So in this case, it would not be an on-site PPA. Obviously, it would be a sending of energy over a long distance. And so, you know, in case that I commit to provide you a certain load, and in case that in that moment I'm not able to cover it, well, how will the off-taker be able to cover that delta of their energy needs? So they need to resort to the balancing market. And if there is no transparent balancing market, that is a barrier. So all of these things, you know, even in the European market, you know, not all countries are having great ease at implementing even domestic PPAs. So we don't, I mean, we're very aware that cross-border PPAs are a frontier practice, even within highly integrated markets in Europe. And so implementing them between two very different and not integrated markets like Morocco and Spain, it's a challenge for these reasons.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Yasmina. I think I will ask Angelo Ferrante to answer some of the question here, but I will add one more, and then last I will turn to Veronica with one more question that came in as well. But let me, I think you remember the one before. So what I would like to add for Angelo Ferrante is how Mezzo can help in some of the questions that were raised. And the question that just came up that I would like to add is the need for sufficient capacity you mentioned, but clear rules for having access to that interconnection capacity and booking it. And so with the previous question I had on balancing wholesale market, and also what role Mezzo and maybe also European Commission, UFM, can you all help to make that happen? And maybe we can just start with the Spain-Morocco interconnector before we extend to future interconnection. So if you can give your comment, and then we'll go to Veronica. Thank you, Mr. Ferrante.
Yes, thank you, Sylvia. As far as flexibility is concerned, of course, everybody recognizes that the more renewables you introduce in the system, the more you need the flexibility. There are many sources of flexibility. Some of them are already available in the systems, and the interconnections might help in valorizing them, because thermal peak generation, gas turbine, but also the existing concentrated solar power plants may be used as a means of flexibility. The balancing services I mentioned in my presentation is a means for flexibility that can be valorized, can be given the necessary importance by means of interconnections. For sure, having forgetting the cross-border issue and considering the development of renewables in the countries, for sure, having inside the country all the means necessary for providing the necessary flexibility is a hard task. This is an additional value that integration of power systems may provide. For the other question, long-term capacity, we have not to forget one issue, that there are rules for allocating capacity, but probably the most important aspect of this process is not to have a capacity, but to have a guaranteed capacity. So the firmness of the allocation process is probably the most important, is more important than having a determined quota if this quota is not reliable. So this is the technical prerequisite I mentioned in my presentation. In terms of rules, if we base on history, that doesn't mean that you have necessary to follow the same process. But in Europe, the allocation of interconnection capacity has been a very slow process. It started with the separate allocations on each border, no? Having 100% of total capacity. First of all, you have to share between the two involved countries how much is allocated by each of the countries. And then in each country, usually it's the regulator who fixes the rules for the allocation, the products that have to be assigned over the different time horizons. Then in Europe, it happened that time after time, year after year, we have reached a process of single allocation mechanism that more or less applies to all the European borders. But if you start from scratch, you can start by fixing simple rules and then try to implement them.
Thank you. I think we could be talking so I would like to, because we're reaching the end, to give the floor also to Veronica to answer some of these questions. And I would like to add one more question for Veronica that came up. Although this question may be also addressed to Yasmina Otsik. I missed that. I don't know if we'll have time for everything, but the additional question that came in is, what amendment to Law 1309 are needed? So in addition to the questions
Sorry, could you repeat? I lost you. What are? I really lost your last
what
question.
amendment to Law 1309 in Morocco are needed? I think it was already covered in part by Yasmina and some of the things here, but I think it goes well with the question of how do you ensure flexibility and the need for balancing and wholesale market and the market coupling, actually, because I think in a way all these things fit together because the laws have to talk to each other. So I think you have the concluding words on that, and then I'll give a few concluding statements and then we'll close. So I only give you like 3 minutes to answer all of that.
In fact, Sylvia, I will have to pick. And by the way, I would be happy to continue this conversation by email with all participants, because I honestly think, as you rightly said, we would need another webinar for this. So for the law, I won't go to detail specific amendments. What I think it's to be said is that UNRE is putting together its staff and its departments right now. Let's first let them do their job and see then what has to be adjusted. This is very important because we all know that what is written on paper is not always what we have in practice, even when it comes to the powers of regulators. But I wanted to spend a couple of words on corporate PPAs, because they allow me to say something that also touches upon what Yasmina said. So financial certainty for utility companies and developers, this is something that has to be addressed by the regulator. So people have to know what they're getting into, said in easier words. And the fact that one of the things we might expect to happen with a regulator function is the removal of significant roadblocks to the financing and building of new renewable facilities. So the idea is that first we are going to have more renewables on the grid, let's say, and then immediately after we need to make sure the grid can sustain these more renewables coming in. And this is where cross-border balancing is key. So the point is really for UNRE to engage its counterparts on the other border of the sea, so CNMC for Spain, CRE, but I would say even ARERA for some issues, because then we know that the countries interested by the exports from Morocco are not just the border ones, but there is a distribution within the European system, and set up some sort of coordination system that is not that much different from what we see for Mediterranean PCI. I make this comparison because in the end, that is exactly what we need. Regulators that regularly meet and assess together what has to be done. Now, it's easy if you have already a system working. But as I was discussing with the president of UNRE, Mr. Bardash, the point is they are hiring people now. So I think they need some more time to do that. But then they have to get engaged full heads on these issues. So Sylvia, I hope I was synthetic enough.
Yeah, no, that's very useful. Actually, from what I see, from what we discussed, I think we could go on for easily another hour. And I think next time there is such a webinar, we need to invite Andre. I think it's clear. And invite some of the buyers and sellers of the corporate PPA, because we've been talking a lot about them, what they need, but they are not represented today. I think what I take, and I know that the Moroccan corporate PPA market already exists and is very dynamic and active. It's not cross-border, but I think we've seen Areva selling directly to some industrial buyers, Qua Power also to Holcim, the cement and others. Plus, there is a major self-generator in Morocco. And if you look at the EU directive on the paragraph on corporate PPA, is not just about corporate PPA, it's also self-generation. Many of the corporate PPAs are on-site generation, even if the generation is handled by a developer, which is different from the consumer. And Morocco already has a big on-site generator with OCP. So I think maybe a suggestion, what I heard a lot as well is to follow the European model and be patient. It takes time. It takes time. Market coupling is happening little by little in Europe, and now we have our coordinated balancing markets throughout Europe, but it took a long time to get there. And the cross-border allocation took a long time. So a good first step will be the market coupling of Morocco with the Iberian Peninsula, because they're already interconnecting and exchanging a lot. And then it could be, like Angelo said, the Maghreb with the peninsula. And when we have the Italy, Tunisia interconnector, we could have Maghreb with the Italy. And so anyway, it does happen overnight. We started in Europe. I think the white paper was the mid 1987, if I recall, and throughout the 90s. So patience is important. I think I'm just trying to give you a quick summary. We have reached the time limit, so I'm turning over to Ilaria to close that session. And I thank all of you for very dynamic contribution. Thank you so much, Ilaria. Over to you.
Thank you, Silvia, and thank you to anyone for participating. I think that this session has been very interesting and the topics are very complex. So it will be also the occasion to organize another follow-up webinar regarding this topic and discussing, as also you suggest, with ARRE, with the corporate PPA company, this topic on detail. So we will, this webinar has been recorded, so you will find the video in the next day on the RES4Africa website, and you will also receive the link of the report, so you can read deeply, and we can start from this document the discussion to open a cross-border PPA opportunity for Morocco. I hope it was very useful for all of you, and I hope to see you soon next time. Roberto, we can't hear you.
I just want to confirm how important was this additional meeting. I was pleased to see the quality of the presentation. I was pleased with the quality of the attendance, not only in number, but also in quality. So I think we have made a step further, Ilaria, toward our approach to Morocco and the Mediterranean. Grazie ancora. And I agree with you. Let's plan another one to go in a deep dive on this issue, which is really, really interesting, even though could be medium long term. Grazie, arrivederci a tutti. Arrivederci.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye, everyone.